So Nick Foles.
Nick Foles, Zach, give me the news dump, and give me the unpacking.
Nick Foles, who did not play in the NFL last year, but had not announced his retirement.
That's why I think that this is a little bit anticlimactic. This is not like Jason Kelsey announcing his retirement, but it's still a nice thing to offer an opportunity for reflection.
Yeah, officially, he announced his retirement today in a post on social media. You can see it was a video of him explaining it. The Eagles will honor Nick Foles, and he'll officially retire as a member of the Eagles week 2 against the Atlanta Falcons, so that Monday night game.
Why do you think it's not the Doug game, which is also a primetime game?
I guess they want to get it sooner, as soon as they could. But a home opener, and of course, the Atlanta home opener, that's what it was following the Super Bowl, right?
There you go. That's true.
So he'll get his day in the sun. The Eagles are...
I mean, it's a primetime game.
This night in the sun. The Eagles... put out.
There's still no sun at night.
Okay, it's a figure of speech. The Eagles put out a lot of clips, and Jeffrey Lurie has a statement. This is a big deal. He's one of the most important players in franchise history. He's the Super Bowl MVP, the only Super Bowl they've ever won. He played his best game on the biggest stage. He's iconic in Philadelphia. Here, there's a statue of him commissioned by Bud Light, but outside the stadium. No player has worn number 9 since he left. I can't imagine a player will wear number 9 again in Eagles history.
You put out the Nick Foles chapter.
I didn't put out the chapter. I wouldn't do that. You got to buy the book for the chapter.
You put out the first
page.
It's a
long chapter.
I saw some pushback. Why was it chapter 10 and not chapter 9?
I actually didn't even think about the numbers of it. It was done sequentially. So there's executives, then coaches, then quarterbacks, and he's the third in the quarterback chapter. Donovan McNabb, then Michael Vick.
Okay, it's chronological.
Nick Foles. So it's done chronologically. As I saw people say that, it probably would have been Good Harmony number 9. I didn't think. I mean, maybe.
Yeah, but I mean, you can't put it out of order.
Maybe I could have structured it so maybe the coaches come after the quarterbacks, and I put a few things in between.
It feels like you did it in a way that makes more logical sense. I probably should
have. I personally, I'll be honest with you, I did not number the chapters when you send it.
Okay.
So I sent the chapters.
You just said this is the Nick Foles chapter.
This is
You ordered it.
They published it as I submitted it.
Yes.
But I did not do chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. I did by sections. So section 1, section 2, section 3. And then I think they put in the chapters thereafter. Anyways, I agree. Relatively anticlimactic, right? It's not like Fletcher Cox or Jason Kelsey in that regard. But everyone in Philadelphia has their Nick Foles story. He's beloved here. I think of Nick Foles both stints. I think of him coming in as a rookie, him taking over for Vic. I think of 2013, that 27 touchdown, 2 interception campaign. I think of 2014, and then the trade in 2015, when you probably provided the best story I know of the trade, when you're working for the team and you find out the compensation and you tried correcting the person.
I really mansplained my boss. She told us it's Foles and whatever pick for Bradford and whatever pick.
Second round pick. Yeah.
I was like, you mean the Eagles are getting the pick, right? She's like, no, the Eagles are getting the pick. I was like, no, that can't be right. That's definitely not correct.
And so that, which I think a lot of people,
real a-hole.
I think a lot of people had that reaction though. Then he comes back, and obviously the run in 2017, which, as we've discussed on this show, a little bit, there's some revisionist history here. The locker room did not know that was going to happen, and there was a lot of tight butts, if you will, going into the playoffs that year, because they did not end the season well. Yeah. I know it was before I teamed up with you on the podcast, but you and Shio have a famous show following the 2017 injury to Carson Wentz. Yes. And then even the Atlanta game, he did not play particularly well.
Yeah, he looked terrible in the Raiders game at the end of the season, right? And then the first half of the Falcons game, he didn't look good either. Yeah.
No, but even the Cowboys game, if you remember Week 17 against the Cowboys, they played him in the first half and just to try to get momentum, and it was bad. They didn't score.
I mean, it was a real talking point.
Exactly.
Would they go to Sudfeld?
I think that was like a media generation.
But like that was the level of play.
Sure,
it was a reasonable thing to discuss whether that was an option because that was the level that Foles was playing at the time.
And then talk about a heater, man. Minnesota and
unbelievable.
The Super Bowl and the way he handled it, the way he played, and then they come back the following year and
do it again
and do it again. The Eagles, like when they put Carson Wentz on ice, they were 6-7 in 2018. The thought was, all right, this is just not our year. And they just go on this great run. He's playing out of his mind. I remember that Houston game in particular when he was getting the crap kicked out of him and goes on and leads them to the playoffs. They beat Chicago. And then the trade, how generous the Eagles were to let him go where he was.
Just the kindness of their collective
but
hearts.
So I always kind of cringe a bit when reporters make it about them when a guy like retires and they're like, this guy always reminds me of my childhood or whatever. But I'll say this.
It's like a shot at me.
No. It's not. No. Like it's about the players. But because we do try to give some personal insight here. Nick Foles was the first player that I met, first player I introduced myself to when I joined the Eagles beat in 2012. I remember vividly, rookies and selected veterans report under Andy Reid. Outside, so I'm waiting outside the locker room in 2012 at Lehigh, and he walks by, and I introduce myself. I'm Zach Berman from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Great to meet you. I'm covering the team, and I remember talking to the late Buddy Tevens about him because he was at the quarterback, the Foles Passing Academy. But anyways, so I got to know Nick pretty well, and Nick's first stint, like the way he thought about Philadelphia, the way everything, the pressure, the market, he did not take it as well the first time as he did the second time. But then even so, he comes back, and again, like not to make this about me, but like we were on very similar time to our children were our first children were born days apart. We got married around the same time. We were going through some similar life experiences. We wrote a book at the same summer. His book did a lot better than my book. So Nick, I got to know Nick decently, and especially the second time around, I have a lot of personal admiration for him in terms of some of the things he values, the way he is as a husband, as a father, and I'm happy that I'm happy that he gets his career celebrated because it's worthy of it.
Well said. Yeah, I mean, I would tell you my specific Nick Foles memories aside from him as a player. It was, I think, right before I left, so that was 2014 or 2015, and we had a friend of ours from college who was going through cancer treatments, and the idea was there was a bald cap that was being sent around, and people would put it on and take a picture in front of something cool, and that was part of the whole deal. And I asked Nick if he would put on the bald cap in the Eagles locker room and take a picture. He was very game to do it. He was very touched by the idea.
That's nice. That's really nice.
And not like that's a small little gesture of generosity, but it's one, I knew that he would be a good guy to go to, and two, he thought it was cool. And there is
and this was the first stint.
This was the first stint.
Okay.
There is when
he had and he had a lot going on in his personal life at that time that he wasn't really sharing. Yeah.
Nick is very religious, right?
Yes.
The Eagles have had a lot of players who are very religious over the years. This is not specific to the Eagles. There are a lot of people in the world who I think use their religion as sometimes a shield for, well, I can be kind of nasty in my day-to-day life, but I'm going to just sort of, boast this up. Nick, I have never heard an experience or witnessed an experience where Nick was not totally just the nicest guy. And, you and I sort of poke fun at the idea of we don't know these guys.
Exactly.
I don't know Nick Foles that well. But I have been around him enough that it certainly does not seem like an act. This is a guy who I think practices what he preaches.
Well said. And there was, you talk about the first stint when I say private, I get stuff going on behind the scenes. He documented this in his book, and he later talked about it. His now wife, then girlfriend, fiance, Tori, had health issue behind the scenes that Nick was very quiet about, and I know because it was the type of thing that like some people in the locker room knew, some people in the media knew, and Nick did not want this in the public sphere. And he continued, he was a professional, he continued playing, but this was something that was clearly weighing on him, and it's something that like he documented in his book. The anecdote I put out on social media today, I often think about this. So the morning after the Super Bowl, he gives this very good quote. Reuben Frank asked what the public can learn from his story, and he talked about failure, and he focused on failure. And it was a quote that's since circulated, but the context that I can add is that 4 years earlier, in 2014, going into the season, I had a conversation with him, and I vividly remember where it was. It was outside. It was the hallway outside the locker room. He right by the weight room. He called me out the chat. He and I were going to talk about this, and the question I posed, because I had just spoken actually to Ron Jaworski the day earlier, and I said, if you're at a dinner table with Ron Jaworski, Randall Cunningham, and Donovan McNabb, what would you ask them about being a quarterback in Philadelphia? And he stopped and he thought about it, and his answer was how they dealt with a bad game, how they dealt with the negativity and the public pressure. And as he was giving his answer there, he said, because we all fail, and like I want to know how they deal with failure. And I mentioned this actually to you a few months ago when I was talking about the book and kind of putting some things together, because it's something that was on his mind well before the Super Bowl, and well before, for instance, when he was on the verge of retiring before the 2017 season, and he was out camping or fishing with Evan Moore, his brother-in-law, and this is something that he had long thought about, and the perspective that he had about football. I love that. I had never heard that story you shared about the locker room and the cap, and that doesn't surprise me, because it is true. Bo is right. We don't know these guys. We have interactions with them. You might get to know members of their family, but we don't truly know them. Oftentimes, what you can go off of, though, are the people around him and what people say. And, in the reporting of my book, and I spoke to Jeffrey Lurie, and hearing Jeffrey Lurie is similar to the statement he said today. He talked about like the professionalism, the character that Nick Foles had, and that was that's a reputation that Nick carries with him. In addition to, you talk to the players on that team. I'm sorry,
the
Carson,
hog on that guy.
I didn't say that. No, Carson was more talented than Nick. We can agree with that. That's why the Eagles kept him. But there was a certain confidence that the team had about Nick Foles based on like the way he played, the way he carried himself. He deserves kind of this victory lap, if you will.
What about the Super Bowl run itself, Zach? Having written a book about it, what's your favorite Foles play from that game or moment? What comes to mind?
Probably the flea. People say the Philly special. I think of.
I do think that the Philly special is like, Doug gets the credit for calling it, but it was Nick's idea.
Yeah. And by the way, Nick, before every game, Nick always caught passes, right? And I remember before, maybe it was the Falcons game the following year, Nick was like catching passes on the sideline, and I think it was a Monday night game, or no, it was a Thursday night game. And NBC caught this, and people are like, he's working on the Philly special. And no, Nick always caught passes before games. That was like part of his routine. So yeah, he deserves credit for that. And we heard the clip of him.
Yeah, it's his suggestion.
But the flea flicker against Minnesota was just an incredible play. But I think of there's two passes in the Super Bowl. First off, the touchdown pass to Corey Clement.
So good.
was like so well placed. And this isn't like the hipster answer, but you talk to a lot of people about that Super Bowl, and they say the big play in the game.
Fourth down.
And Brandon Brooks talked about this when he was on, was the 4th and 2 to Zach Ertz. And like he threw that to Ertz with like an inch to spare. So that's probably those are probably some of the memories. What about you?
Those are good ones. Yeah, I think I was going to say the Clement one too. Although the Philly special, like
it has to be. Yeah,
it's his idea.
And he wasn't catching it all the time during the they practiced that in the ballroom. They didn't want it on tape.
Sure.
And
Also, the
hotel
acting
ballroom.
job.
Oh, yes, exactly.
I mean, he does such a good job.
Yeah.
It's like, give the guy an Oscar.
Yeah. So by the way, if you haven't seen the interview we did, or I shouldn't even say the interview, it was more the conversation that we had with Brandon Brooks back in March. Check that out. I think it was March, or was it April?
I trust you.
In the spring. Check that out. But Brandon talked about like the Philly special as well. But yeah, you have to. I guess you have to think of the Philly special.
Super chat from Arthur Bowolf Smith, who says the Eagles are honoring Nick week 2 against Atlanta. Do you guys think anyone wears 9 again for the Birds?
I don't. Josh Sweat asked for it this year, and they said it's not available. So it's been, he left after the 2018 season. The Eagles were so gracious to let him hit free agency that year. So that's 6 seasons ago, and then and so no one's worn it since, and it might
I could kind of see a scenario in which
that gets back
Nick bequeaths it. Like
Interesting.
They draft a young first-round quarterback who's worn 9 his whole life, and Nick gives it his blessing.
Okay,
something like that.
Maybe so. Yeah, maybe so. That's interesting.
Just an idea.
I don't think Nick. I think Nick wore number 5 when he was at Arizona, which he obviously couldn't wear here. He wore number 9 here. But yeah, no, I don't think they give number 9 out.
How much do you think that Nick Foles' legacy as having won the Super Bowl as a backup quarterback has influenced the Eagles' decision-making at that position?
I mean,
they've always valued it, right?
Yeah, they would like to think so. So actually, so Jeffrey Lurie told me before before the Super Bowl that year, I interviewed Jeffrey in the team hotel in Minnesota, and I talked about this checklist that he had of like tenets for a successful organization. And he said that he later added second quarterback, and he would not call it the backup quarterback. It has to be called the second quarterback, because he talked about how important that was in the organization. And then he emphasized to me like the amount of money that they ate getting rid of Chase Daniel so they can bring in Nick Foles, because there's a lot of teams that would be like, look, we just signed this guy last year. We're not just going to, I think they had to eat $8 million to bring and then pay Foles on top of that, but they wanted Nick in the building. And then, yeah, I mean, clearly since then, if you think they signed Josh McCown, when they were going into it, they wanted Nate Sudfeld. Sudfeld got hurt that year. They brought in McCown. They signed Flacco. They signed Mariota. They drafted Jalen Hurts, of course. So they traded for Kenny Pickett this year.
Drafted Tanner McKee.
Well, that's the thing. There was a 15-step guide to how Howie Roseman should approach the offseason, and one of those is let Tanner McKee compete for the backup quarterback job. But instead, they wanted to trade for Kenny Pickett based on maybe the preseason last year, which we'll get to.
We all silly like the mayor.